Ever since I can remember, I've always been a chronically ill child. I've been in the hospital more times than I can count, and I take a dizzying amount of medications that requires not one, but two pill boxes to keep it all straight, and to accommodate all the pills which often puff out the lids. I was the kid who spent his summers inside on a respirator because I always seemed to be gasping for air. When I used an inhaler, I often felt worse, like someone was jabbing me in the lungs with tiny needles. My bones were unusually brittle, not enough to be diagnosed with brittle bone disease, but enough to help keep my family doctor in booming business. I threw up often, but amid the bouts of chronic nausea and fatigue, I always felt hungry. My immune system was running a constant marathon, and I had no idea how my white blood cells kept the pace up enough to keep me living. It didn't seem to be cancer or some other autoimmune disease, but it was something. I was poked and prodded by every type of specialist and house-level medical genius, but not one of them could come up with a complete diagnosis for all the weird issues I had. So instead, they blasted me with a shotgun of full diagnoses, and just watched to see which ones would stick. In my case, the idea of a differential diagnosis instead became, well, do you have a better idea? Thankfully, my parents had good medical insurance, and I was young enough to not have to worry about transitioning out of it anytime soon. I was fairly certain the insurance office regarded me as a bomb that was ready to go off at any time. During my sickest days, I'm pretty sure my parents even wondered if I would be better off dead. After all, what kind of a life can a child have when most of their life is spent in the hospital? I had made it to high school mostly intact, and was fudging my way through a reading quiz about A Tale of Two Cities. I only read the back cover of the book during Mrs. Lewandowski's class when I felt a terrible pain in my stomach. I hunched over at my desk, and Mrs. Lewandowski, aware that I had basically went to the student clinic every week with a bizarre complaint, let me out of class to phone my parents.
"He's gonna spew,"
I heard Harold Kramer say as I left the class. I pressed my forehead into the cold steel of the lockers as I phoned my mom. Within half an hour, we were in the ER, and I was again being poked and prodded by the staff who I mostly knew on a first-name basis. After several bouts of testing, it was determined that my appendix was being an asshole and had to go. Great. He's overdue on rent, Dr. Lamdis said with a chuckle. Despite the fact I've been chronically ill, I've managed to avoid needing much in the way of surgery. From how the doctors explained it to me, my body seemed to be anatomically sound, but it was like something else was getting in the way of my organs, making them work less efficiently than they should be, but not enough to be a liability. I didn't really care, as I just preferred to avoid getting sliced open. The surgery I did have had mostly been to fix fractured bones, and after a while, I just avoided any and all physical activity, so I never had to go through that again. They prepped me for surgery, and I was able to spend some time with my mom, who wasn't as worried as a normal mother would be in the situation, most likely because of how often we'd been through this before. Dad was on his way from work, and would likely be there when I woke up. They gave me the gas, and I was out. When I woke up, things became incredibly strange. I was really groggy and out of it for a while. But the most surprising thing was that the doctors said I needed chemotherapy right away. I never felt so sick in my life as they pumped me full of the poison. right after coming out of surgery no less. I began to genuinely worry that this could be the end. Had I had cancer all along and they never caught it? Were my insides filled with tumors? My mom looked white as a sheet in the chair next to my bed. All she would tell me was that the doctors found out what was making me sick and this would help. I was getting mad. My dad wasn't even there yet, and I couldn't understand what was happening. Getting chemotherapy after your appendix was removed didn't seem to be the norm. In between bouts of severe vomiting, I drifted in and out of sleep, and a fever I had never experienced before. This had to be my end. I had nothing left to give. My vomiting turned into sick, dry heaves and empty retches. I could feel my throat cracking from the effort. I am not sure how many days passed in the ICU, but one day I woke up and Dr. Lambis was sitting next to me. "Dr. Lambis," I whispered, "the hell's going on with me?" "Hey there, champ," he said casually. It looked like he too had been through the ringer. Though I had felt terrible before, I was feeling a bit better. "That's why I'm here," he said. He took off his glasses and rubbed his eyes. I'm not exaggerating when I say that in my 20 years of medical practice, not once have I ever seen anything remotely like this in my life. I've called around and nobody has. I felt scared and drew the thin hospital covers closer to myself. What the hell could it be? Have you ever heard of parasites? I thought back to biology class. Yeah, I don't know a lot, but I know they have a host and they feed off it in some way. Right, Dr. Lambis said with a heavy sigh. Well, it turns out you have parasites living inside you. Normally there are spots parasites can commonly be found. On x-rays, for example, they may show up as a mass in your stomach or larvae in the lungs. I winced at the disgusting thought that something else had been living inside of me all this time, something I couldn't see. "The thing is," Dr. Lambis said, and then stopped. "Your parasites are unlike any ever encountered. They were moving around inside of you. Actively moving around, living in different parts of you." I didn't understand. Wouldn't I have felt them? Not with how small they were, but it's hard to explain. They were living inside of you, boy. They were like the stowaways in that book, The Borrowers, he said with a sick laugh. I shuddered. What do you mean? It would be easier to show you, but it won't make understanding any easier. He reached into his white coat and pulled a small vial out of his breast pocket. He handed it to me and said, "This is what's been living inside of you." It wasn't a what, it was a who. Inside the small glass vial, on the very bottom of the container, was an almost imperceptibly small humanoid, naked and devoid of any kind of hair. I couldn't believe it. As I turned the vial, the tiny fleshy blob rolled around like a corpse, with hands and feet. If you could anatomically refer to them as being the same, splayed out like a rag doll. A tiny, naked, human-like figure had been living inside of me. I could hear my heartbeat kicking up on the monitor next to my bed. Dr. Lambis patted me on the shoulder and took the vial back into his jacket. We're sending samples of them to labs around the world, hoping we might be able to get some answers. Your brittle bones were a result of them hollowing out your bones from the inside. They fed on your bone marrow and would eat away at parts of your organs on a microscopic level. You wouldn't show any damage until years had gone by. because they were so small. That's what happened to your appendix. It wasn't just infected. Part of it was gone, eaten away. I felt sick, unable to comprehend how such a thing could have happened. The thought of little burrowers digging through my flesh and feasting on my meat made my skin crawl, and there were still others inside of me at that very second. The chemo should eradicate them. We'll do a full body x-ray in the morning, and hopefully we'll be able to see a full picture of just how many there were. I've explained it to your parents, but we'll be keeping you under close observation until we know you're in the clear. What will happen to the bodies inside me? I asked. Well, once they're dead, your white blood cells should be able to finish taking care of the remains, and whatever's left should be absorbed or pass on through, he said with a grim smile. Dr. Landis? I asked. Yeah, son? Where did they come from? We don't know. Nobody knows. I fell back into my pillow as Dr. Landis left, understanding why my mother's face had been so white. Jesus Christ, they had been eating away at me for years. Even though I've been given a clean bill of health now, there's one thing I'll never be able to answer. Something that will haunt me forever, anytime I feel a random pain in my body or come down sick from another infection. How the hell did they get inside of me? And maybe worst of all, who else could the burrowers be living inside?